Thank you very much, Clara, and welcome once more to everyone to this session on inclusive VNRs. We are now well into the high-level political forum, and this is an official side event jointly hosted by the Norwegian Forum for Development and Environment, ourselves at Action for Sustainable Development, and the Government of Norway. And it's a real pleasure and a privilege for me to be able to guide the conversation today with all of you. And I hope we have a rich and enlightening discussion as we gear up for next week's presentations of the voluntary national reviews. Now, at Action for Sustainable Development, we've been following the voluntary national reviews for every year since the start of the Sustainable Development Goals process, and we've seen some very interesting developments in how civil society can engage in those processes. And we want to ensure that we provide space and opportunity for exchange of views between different partners in different countries who are active both from the government point of view and from the civil society point of view in ensuring that dialogue is as inclusive as possible. So for our first panel, we have two governments who have kindly given their time to join us today, the Government of Norway and also the Government of Malaysia. And then we'll hear also from the United Nations Development Coordination Office, who are responsible for connecting with resident coordinators and country teams. So first of all, to kick us off, I'm very pleased to introduce Mr. Jesper Beverfjord, apologies if I didn't pronounce that correctly, who's the Senior Advisor in the Ministry of Local Government and Modernization at the Government of Norway and has been shepherding the VNR process in the Norway government. Jesper, over to you.
Thank you for giving me the floor, Ollie. No apologies are needed. So distinguished delegates, we really appreciate the opportunity to speak during such an important event. So we would like to thank the Norwegian Forum for Development and Environment, as well as Action for Sustainable Development, for organizing this event and providing a valuable platform for exchange. We're looking forward to hear the other speakers and listening to the panel afterwards. Norway has a long-standing tradition of involving civil society organizations in decision-making processes. Civil society organizations advise, inform, complement, and keep in check the work national, regional, and local authorities do. Thus, they are the cornerstone of the Norwegian democracy and our work to promote sustainable development. Civil societies play a significant role in the planning, implementation, and revision of the SDGs. In Norway, we have a tradition and a political consensus on the importance of involving civil society into multi-level decision-making processes, as well as other major groups and stakeholders. Norway seeks to increase awareness about discriminatory practices and reduce inequalities and promote inclusion both on the national and international level. Therefore, Norway provides financial and political support to a vibrant and pluralistic civil society, which contributes significantly to keeping the objective of leaving no one behind on the political agenda. Civil society highlights important issues such as good governance and provides channels of influence and participation through a community-based bottom-up approach. This is particularly important for the work such as the preparation of the VNR report, but also in the ongoing process of the recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. In about a week, Norway will present our second VNR, and one of the key challenges in the VNR process was to better involve civil society and other stakeholders. Our report in 2016 lacked meaningful stakeholder involvement, and we are made it a priority now to include the views and recommendations from stakeholders and civil society. The VNR team established contact with 3 key stakeholders and gave them responsibility for coordinating with smaller organizations to deliver contributions to the report. The Norwegian Forum was responsible for coordinating feedback on Norway's progress on all 17 SDGs from their network of 50 organizations. In the second VNR, we provide an overview of Norway's progress towards the SDGs since 2016. For the first time, we have included 2 comprehensive assessments of the SDGs, one conducted by the government and another by civil society. The assessments identify achievements and challenges affecting implementation. This feedback from civil society on each goal was included in the report right after the government assessment of the process. We agreed early on that civil society's contributions were to be added to the VNR report unedited. That was proved to be a very rewarding decision. The ministries that were responsible for assessing progress on their own goals knew that on the next page there will be an unedited account from the civil society on the same matter. We intentionally avoided discussion about claims made by the civil society in the report. At the end of the day, we believe that having different views enriches and strengthens the VNR. We also invited UN Global Compact Norway to coordinate feedback from the industrial sector and businesses. SDG Norway contributed with views and recommendations from the school and academic sectors. The Sami Digi, the Sami Parliament, also contributed to the VNR by giving their insights and perspective on the SDG implementation. Further, Norway's VNR report also includes an overview of the key findings from the voluntary subnational review, which has been conducted by the Norwegian Association of Local and Regional Authorities, KS. In this way, we made sure to integrate 2 levels of reporting from Norway. The VNR team had extensive discussion with Norwegian Forum, UN Global Compact, SDG Norway, and KS throughout this process in order to channel their knowledge into their report. So this year, civil society and other stakeholders has been closely involved in Norway's VNR process. Their contributions has made our VNR more inclusive and insightful, and we can truly say that we now have a whole of society approach in our work towards achieving the 2030 agenda. We now wish to build on this success for further work with the SDGs. The governments want to strengthen the cooperation with civil society on the implementation of the 2030 agenda and will establish a national forum for the SDGs. This is currently in planning stages, and we will need input from civil society in order to set up a proper mandate that will help us reach our goals. We therefore want to invite Norwegian Forum and other stakeholders to give us input on how we should do it. And with that invitation, I would like to end my intervention and again say thank you, and I'm looking forward to listening in on the rest of this event. Many thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Beverfjord. I think you've highlighted a very, very compelling story there in Norway of including, I'm really very surprised and heartened to hear that you included civil society views unedited straight into the VNR. That's a very, very powerful example, and also interesting to hear about the follow-up in terms of building this national forum for the SDGs that will continue that dialogue for civil society over the coming months and years. So we've started with an example in the European continent, and next we move to an example from the Asian perspective, and we have Dr. Zunika Binti Mohammed, who's the Deputy Director General of the Economic Planning Unit at the Prime Minister's Department in the Government of Malaysia. Dr. Mohammed, I believe you have some slides, so I'm just going to switch to your slides. Welcome. I'll pass the floor now to you.
Thank you, Oli. Thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this event. And actually, it is a great pleasure and honor for me to represent Malaysia to speak in this opening panel. Without further ado, I would like to share some of our experiences in terms of our process of preparing Malaysia VNR. And it is an important process that we have taken into consideration all the multi-stakeholders inputs through our engagement in producing this very substantive and comprehensive VNR report. Do we have the slide now, Oli? In terms of the preparation of the VNR for Malaysia, This will be our second time. Let's go to slide number 2. This is our second time in terms of submitting our VNR report. While the first VNR 2017 focused heavily on the government efforts in achieving SDG, our second VNR 2021 took a different approach by adopting a whole of nation approach. And we conducted a comprehensive multi-stakeholders engagement. There has been a lot of collaboration between the states and non-state actors. CSOs were also invited as members of the technical as well as steering committee for the preparation of our VNR and to review the draft of the VNR. The Malaysian government encouraged an open, transparent process for CSOs and other stakeholders input during the consultation stage. This helped us gain a better perspective in terms of the national performance as well as identifying gaps and challenges in implementing SDG in Malaysia. Let's go to the second slide. In terms of preparation of our VNR, we commenced the VNR process in January 2021. The consultation were appointed. The consultant, we have a consultant appointed to help the government in preparing this report. And the appointment was in late December and began with data analysis and literature review. The VNR inception workshop started on 8th of February 2021 after the first technical working committee and steering committee formed and met on the 2nd and 5th of February respectively. And the engagement and editorial process were performed simultaneously throughout the February until our submission report to the UN. In the next slides, in terms of data availability, I would like to share here that the Department of Statistics Malaysia led the data and undertaken assessment of data availability since 2017. Based on the review assessment in 2020, the VNR 2021 benefited from enhanced data availability. And more than 50% of SDG indicators are now fully available. We also receive input from various stakeholders for the write-up, and many contributed box article for this VNR 2021. And in the next slide, let me share a little bit on the whole of nation approach that we have adopted in preparing our VNR. The whole of nation approach actually is essential in attaining the Agenda 2030. It allows for more meaningful participation of all stakeholders and enables easier mobilization of resources needed to implement the SDGs. And localizing SDG can be expedited as well through enhanced support from communities. And in terms of challenges, we have also identified some of the challenges in implementing the whole of nation approach. These include mapping and reaching out to the relevant stakeholders, particularly during our difficult time in terms of the emergence of COVID-19 pandemic. Secondly, is more time and resources are needed to reach every stakeholders. The third challenges is greater awareness and capacity building are needed to reach out to the most vulnerable community, especially in the remote areas. And another challenge is some stakeholders may have extreme views, and there's a need to provide an understanding and balance on the matter raised. So in terms of our preparation, we benefit very much from the inputs that we have gotten from all stakeholders under this whole of nation approach. We have input directly from our CSOs, and in fact, they have contributed box articles to be put in, and we have also input from our local government as well in our current VNR report. So I think that's all that I would like to share today in this session. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mohammed, and thank you for such a comprehensive process that you have engaged in over the past 6 months. It shows that really there is a great opportunity there for dialogue and to put in place mechanisms that can allow for different viewpoints and different perspectives to be heard. And I think we'll hear more about that when we come to our civil society coalition friends in the second panel. So to conclude this opening panel, we're very pleased that we have also got the presence of the UN's Development Cooperation Office, and in this capacity, Brian Williams, who will be speaking and giving us some key ideas around how to engage better with the UN resident coordinators offices and the country teams. Brian is the acting chief of the policy and programming branch at the UN Development Coordination Office. So Brian, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Ali, Dr. Zunika, Jesper. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. My name is Brian Williams. I'm from the Development Coordination Office in the UN, which I hope everybody knows is the new office that was set up a couple of years ago as part of the comprehensive UN development system reforms that the Secretary General has launched. First, let me congratulate to all of you who have participated in the voluntary national review process, all countries that have undertaken a VNR this year. Really an important process, and amazing that you've been able to mobilize in the midst of COVID and everything else. Doing a voluntary national review really is one of the critical steps to making sure that there's a whole of society approach to recovering from COVID-19 and staying on track to meet the Agenda 2030 and achieve the sustainable development goals. As you well know, one of the taglines for the SDGs is leave no one behind. And so when you're putting together these voluntary national reviews, it's important that they are inclusive, that they're looking at not just national, but subnational, local levels, and that all kinds of communities that might be at risk of exclusion are included in the voluntary national review process. And to achieve that, civil society is absolutely critical. You cannot reach all communities without the help of community organizations that are representing the people that you're trying to include. So the Development Coordination Office, but really what that means is the UN development system is very committed to ensuring that civil society has a role to play in this process. The centerpiece of our engagement here is the UN resident coordinator. So as part of the development system reform that was undertaken a couple of years ago, the resident coordinator is now a full-time job, is not sort of added on to other work, but it is the representation of the Secretary General at the country level. So they've got more time to focus on some of this mobilization work and reaching out. In addition, the resident coordinator's office has a new post that it didn't have before, which is a partnerships officer. So resident coordinators have more time and they've got staff, part of whose purpose is to reach out to civil society. And the guidance that we provide from the Secretariat here in New York to countries is that they should be looking at finding new ways to engage with civil society. We're so pleased in this context to be partnering with Ollie in the Action for SDG. Even around the voluntary national review process itself, we've worked with him to make sure that resident coordinators are aware of and open to working with civil society. And I think in more than 20 countries around the world this year for VNRs, we've somehow managed to make sure that connections were made and get people involved. In addition to the voluntary national review, though, I wanted to take the occasion to talk about a couple of other instruments that are critical to the development process, to the UN's work at country level, and for which civil society participation is really quite important. The first of these is called the Common Country Analysis. So every 5 years, as part of the core planning cycle, the United Nations country team is to put together a common country analysis. This analysis is an analysis of the United Nations, by itself. Is not a document that is developed with any other, is not co-produced, let's say, with government or other partners. It's the United Nations analysis. Of course, to do it properly requires lots of consultation with all of the UN's partners, especially government, but also civil society. And I was pleased to hear earlier one of the other speakers mentions the Global Compact and the private sector. So as part of our guidance, when we ask UN country teams, so it's the resident coordinator with UNICEF and UNDP and all the other UN entities that are participating in development in a country, when we ask that UN country team to get together and think about what are the development challenges in a country, we explicitly ask them to talk to partners, development partners, of course, government at all levels, but also civil society in the private sector. So this common country analysis is a tool that's important, and we really encourage civil society partners to, through their federations or through their grouping organizations or individually, to reach out to resident coordinators if it hasn't happened already, and find ways that they can contribute to this common country analysis. The other tool that I wanted to mention very briefly is the UN Sustainable Development Cooperation Framework. So the Cooperation Framework is a document, is the plan really, also done once in 5 years. It's developed with the government, and it is the expression, is the program framework where the UN describes what it's hoping to contribute to support a nation's effort to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals usually is a 5-year period. The cooperation framework is, of course, something that is signed with government, so it's something that is discussed with government. However, the process to develop it should also be very inclusive. And so here too, we encourage, our guidance encourages country teams to be discussing with civil society when they're preparing they're thinking through what are the strategic objectives, what are the outcomes that the UN collectively is hoping to contribute to. And every year there are implementation plans. So joint work plans, these are the UN system-wide work plans that year on year are the way that we implement the cooperation framework. And in those outcome groups, in those joint work plans, we also hope that there are ways in which civil society can provide some feedback into the UN about what's working and what's not working, and how the UN can do a better job with its governmental partners of making sure that no one is left behind and that our work is being inclusive. So let me stop here. These are some of the ways that the UN is encouraging with the development system reform to make sure that we're doing a better job of building partnerships, that we're more extroverted, let's say, in our orientation than perhaps we were before. It is not just about doing next year what we did last year, but we really want, through this common country analysis process and then in the cooperation framework, to be thinking through ways that we can be doing a much better job of being inclusive, making sure that no one is left behind, that communities are all participating somehow. And in all of this, civil society really has a critical role to play. It's not always easy to do. We recognize that. There's a lot of civil society partners out there, and sort of organizing the interaction is not always easy. But I would like very much to assure everyone here today that the United Nations is committed to finding ways to work with civil society in order to, in an inclusive manner, achieve the SDGs. So thank you very much, Ollie.
Thank you so much, Brian, and it's wonderful to have you here with us today. And we've absolutely appreciated the support in a number of key countries from the resident coordinator teams for the VNRs and enabling civil society voices to be heard. I've seen 1 or 2 questions in the chat, Brian, of people asking if they might have a link to the CCAs, the Common Country Analysis that you mentioned. If there's anything that you think would be useful to post in the chat, please feel free, any links that people might be able to find out more. and we can also share those with all participants and all registered guests who are joining us today. So to take us forward now, we've heard from two strong examples of countries. We've heard about the UN's role as well. Now we'd like to start to go a little bit further in terms of how civil society engages. And as we mentioned at the start, we have been following the process of the VNRs since 2016, since the first year after the adoption of the SDGs. And working with many national coalitions and partners, we've been developing ways of analyzing and understanding how civil society sees the implementation of the SDGs and providing, where possible, independent spotlight reports that go alongside the official reports. And we've heard already some examples of where those have been included into the official reports. But one of the things that was proposed through some of our colleagues in Sri Lanka and in India and in other countries, Brazil, Kenya, that have previously done VNRs was a scorecard model, which is a model that allows us to provide an evaluation, a scoring, which we can't claim to be the definitive score, but it is a view from a broad civil society coalition in many countries on how they see progress with the goals. So my colleague Nicolas is going to talk us through now some of the scores that we've managed to gather from national coalitions working in many of the VNR countries this year. And this will just give us a flavor of how civil society sees the progress of the goals in key VNR countries. So Nicolas, I can share the screen, and whenever you're ready, it's over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ollie, and good day, everyone. So the slides are not on. Perfect. Thank you, Ollie. So yeah, regarding the People Scorecard, I would like first to present it briefly and also its methodology. Well, the People Scorecard, as Ollie was saying, it was developed as a tool in a collaborative fashion in 2018 in order to provide a framework based on civil society's shared perceptions on the progress of SDG implementation at the national level. This year, in particular, A4Z has provided support for national CSO coalitions in order to conduct independent scorecard-based assessment of progress, plus spotlight reports, complementary spotlight reports in 31 countries in Africa, Asia, Latin America, and the Caribbean, and the Middle East, Near Asia regions. And these 31 countries also include 3 contributions from 3 European countries. And well, regarding the methodology, has to be said that it's based on a qualitative assessment of each one of the SDGs. And this assessment is centered around 10 key areas that together constitute an inclusive conception of the implementation process. So national coalitions are asked to provide a grade from 1 to 5 for each one of the goals and each one of the key areas included in these goals. And regarding the sequence for the assessment process, it obviously varies a little bit from country to country, depending on their context, national context, and on the way and on the history of self-organizing that and independent reporting that each national coalition has. But it has to be said that the first stage is to distribute the survey based on the scorecard to the widest range possible of CSOs and community groups. Then the stage of processing the data and developing a draft aggregated scorecard that is then validated, which results are validated then through a virtual or in-person or workshop. It has also has to be said that the People Scorecard either provide a structure to the spotlight reports, or the spotlight reports can be a complement with a completely different structure or slightly different structure. Next slide, please, Oli. Yeah, so going deeper into the 10 key areas that are actually included in the assessment of each SDG. The first one is the existence of national action plans, strategies, and budgets. The second one is the existence of legal and policy framework that actually put into motion these plans and strategies. Then there's the key area of institutional support that actually refers to the scope of the institutional capacities that are made available for each one of the goals. Then the implementation at the national level, which tries to measure the perception of the policy implementation efforts that are being provided on the ground by the government and CSOs. And also, well, in this key area, there is also a degree of quantitative assessment, given that in the measure of this key area, CSOs can look, of course, as indicators of progress in their assessment and in their actually scoring. Then implementation at local level, it's the same, but for local governments. Public awareness and capacity building, it's pretty self-explanatory. Also, of course, related to SDGs. Monitoring, evaluation, and reporting, which refers to the institutional arrangements for follow-up and review inside the country. The VNR process, the quality of the VNR process in itself, and also the way the institutional arrangements for follow-up and review and the VNR process in itself are actually embedded into, or to what extent they are embedded into the public policy cycles in the country. Then we have the transparency and accountability mechanisms key area. Inclusive partnerships, which measure the extent and perceived quality of multi-stakeholder partnerships in the country for SDG implementation. And then the citizen participation and civil society engagement key area, which refers to the extent of formal or informal participation mechanisms present in the country. Next slide, please, Oli. Yeah, so this year, as I was telling you, we at A4SE, we partner with the 31 national coalitions in 5 regions. But for this launch, soft launch of the scorecard, we are focusing on 17 key VNR countries, since we are in the midst of the HLPF. And we say key VNR countries because there are a couple of countries that started their process for completing the scorecard pretty late, and they are still in the process of completing their scorecard. So for now, we are focusing on 17. Also, it has to be said that while these 31 national partners cover a wide array of political regimes, of political cultures, of institutional capacities, of fiscal spaces, of civic spaces, of different socioeconomic and environmental contexts and challenges, which also entails that civil society has different expectations regarding the institutional capacity of their government, and has different ways of self-organizing for independent assessment and monitoring and advocacy. But overall, the scorecard is a framework that has fed into already existing processes, like in the case of Brazil, Mexico, Malaysia, Colombia, which have an extensive history of self-organizing for independent assessment. And but it has also provided the opportunity for CSOs and national coalitions for enhanced engagement with their government, and the possibility of providing concrete contributions to the process. For example, in Zimbabwe or Sierra Leone, which we will hear the example of their inclusive process later on in the next panel. Next slide, please, Oli. Yes, so regarding the actual scoring, we have a first layer of results since we are still receiving scorecards at the moment. So it's an ongoing process, but we have a first preliminary set of results, which are organized by SDGs and by total, for total scores for the entire set of countries. So regarding SDG 1 and SDG 10, which we have on screen, has to be said that there's a lot of similarities and overlapping regarding the ranking, and also regarding the average score for the SDG. For SDG 1 is 55%, for SDG 10 is 54%. Well, at the top we have Norway, Bhutan, and Germany for each one of these SDGs, and a pretty large set of countries that are in a medium range from 60 to 45. And then a set of countries trailing, of course, but for you have to keep in mind that for the ones that are at the top, it means that they scored pretty highly in every one of the key areas for assessment. In the case of the medium range countries, they tend to score pretty high on legal framework and national action plans, but pretty weakly on actual implementation and regarding the governance process, the inclusivity of the process. And well, for the ones that are trailing, they tend to score pretty weakly on every one of the on each of the key areas. So next slide, please, Oli. Yeah, this is SDG 3. So for access to quality health, this one is the relative good news within the scorecards, because it's SDG with the highest average score at 59%. And yeah, we have a pretty wide array of countries that are actually medium range or high to high scores. So it's pretty interesting to find out that it's the SDG that has the most advances. Next slide, please, Oli. So here we have SDG 12, that on the contrary is the SDG that has the lowest average score at 49%. And then we have, we register pretty low scores, particularly in some Latin American countries. Surprisingly in Spain also. But we still have at the top Norway, Germany, and Bhutan. In the case of Bhutan, has to be acknowledged that it is a country that has a different concept of development that is centered around the concept of happiness, and is so less materialistic in its conception of development than the Western countries, let's say. So that reflects on this scorecard. Next slide, please, Oli. So regarding SDG 16, actually, it's a pretty average score at 50%, but we can see that actually the 4 countries that are at the top of SDG 16 are the same ones that are at the top of SDG 10. And there's a lot of overlap with the SDG 1 and SDG 10. So here we could eventually see that there could be so interesting correlations or patterns that we'll be able to delve more deeply once we have all the scorecards and we are able to actually disaggregate the data for organized by key area. And it will allow us to see if there are really like strong correlations between transparency, accountability, participation, inclusivity, and to what extent it actually has an enabling effect on, for example, poverty alleviation, social protection schemes, equal opportunities, etc. So that would be interesting to research on. And that, by the way, will be the focus of a full report that we will be elaborating on the coming months, and hopefully launch in September, I think. So next slide, please, Oli. In the case of SDG 17, well, the average is 51%. We still have Norway and Bhutan at the top, and a pretty wide array of countries that have medium range scores also. Next slide, please, Oli. I see we forgot to include the one with the slide with the total scores. But anyway, I just want to that will be shared widely in our social networks anyway, and in a midterm report, let's say. But what I wanted to say regarding the scorecard is that you really have to keep in mind that one thing to really keep in mind is that since these key assessments are areas are primarily centered around the process of implementation, of its quality and scope, when more than actual results of the SDG implementation process. When you see a country that has, for example, 80%, it doesn't necessarily mean that it has achieved 80% of its SDGs, but instead that that 80% refers to the fact that the essential elements and factors that are necessary for an inclusive implementation process are pretty much in place, and so the right conditions for a sound and inclusive implementation process are actually in place. So that's what these scores actually represent. So that's a very key aspect to keep in mind when interpreting these scores. But now that we will move into the processing the entire set of scorecards, not only VNR countries, and also we'll be receiving the actual spot rate reports, the narrative reports. We will be able to delve deeper into the factors, correlations, trying to identify patterns and trends, interesting trends regarding the correlation between the different key areas, etc. So as I said, that will be the subject and the focus of a later report on this scorecard. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Nicolas. And it's great that you've been able to do that analysis in a quick turnaround. We know that many of these reports have only just been coming in over recent weeks. And of course, you yourself, Nicolas, I know you've been very involved in your previous roles on the Chilean National Coalition and also the Latin American coalition, Mesa de Articulación. And so it's great that we have your experience to help us with that. And we will find that slide. I'm glad you mentioned it, the slide with the summary totals scores. Yes. And we can post that up a little bit later on. We'll find that additional slide. But time now is moving on. And I'm very keen that we now hear from many of our colleagues from the national coalitions who have joined us to give their perspective on how they see things, and perhaps reflecting a little bit on the scores that you've just seen, where you see your country represented on those scores. Perhaps if each of you might give us some opening remarks in terms of how you see civil society engagement in your country, and how you might consider the scoring, whether or not that reflects the reality that you see on the ground. So I'd like to just introduce our next panel now. I'll just go to the next slide here. Panel 2, we have Sondra, who's our co-host from the Norwegian Forum for Development and Environment, Sondra Matias Nava. We also have Lina Paula Negret from SECONG, the Colombian Confederation of NGOs. And we have Professor Dr. Denison Jayasuriya from the Malaysian CSO SDG Alliance, and Samuel Toure from Sierra Leone's SDG Coalition. So I will stop the screen share now so we can see each other. And I will come first to Sondra, please. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Ollie, and thanks for all the wonderful presentations so far. I also want to thank Action for Sustainable Development and the Norwegian government for co-hosting this event with us, and personally to Mr. Beverfjord for our cooperation in the VNR process. As mentioned before, we had quite an inclusive VNR process this year, which also is reflected in the scorecard, where we gave Norway pretty high scores because there are now more plans and more action and more engagement. Norwegian civil society was invited to contribute to the Norwegian VNR with one assessment, a one-page assessment of each of the SDGs, inspired by the Finnish VNR from 2020. In addition to writing these assessments, we were also able to read a draft version of the VNR report. We were asked to give an assessment of the successes, the challenges, and also give some feedback on how we can improve in the future. And this setup gave us the opportunity to use the report to highlight the most important challenges, as well as our solutions to solve them. It was us in the Norwegian Forum for Development and Environment who were given the task to coordinate this, and we managed to gather more than 80 CSOs to contribute to the assessments. And this whole process, which Mr. Beverfjord as well took us through, the government really has shown their commitment to engaging stakeholders in implementing the Agenda 2030. And this is a trend I hope we will see more of, both in Norway and in other countries. However, we also had some challenges in this process. Even though I think the government and us in civil society are quite, we agree on many of the principles for participation and engagement, I think we always will have some room for improvement in how to set them out in practice and how to make them work in specific processes. First of all, engaging a broad coalition of civil society actors takes a lot of time and a lot of resources. This was also highlighted by the Malaysian speaker as a challenge, and I think it's the case for many engagement processes because we are so many and diverse, and it's difficult to get the information to filter down at the local level. I think also some CSOs would have liked a clearer output of this VNR report also after HLPF. It is in Norway now, Mr. Beverfjord invited us to a meeting about the new National Forum for Agenda 2030. And a national action plan was also recently launched. So now we have some ways to use the VNR in further engagement with the government. And I think this is key to engaging also stakeholders to take their time to really put some work into it. That being said, we have also experienced a lot of very positive effects of this cooperation and this engagement already. The most obvious one is information sharing with the government and also the international community. And we have also experienced that our contributions is not only tolerated in the official report, but they are welcome. And this is crucial to building trust between the government and other stakeholders. And I think it will be very important in our further development of this engagement that we see this mutual trust. I also believe that this whole process has raised awareness of the SDGs in civil society, and it has also made us more aware of other stakeholders' engagement and commitments to meeting the SDGs, which I hope will lead to even more fruitful cooperation between different stakeholders as well. As we saw in the People's Scorecard, we have a way to go still, even though there are some positive trends. We need to make this report into action and making it into a real policy. And it's crucial now that the conversations and the dialogues in making these VNR reports, both in Norway and in other countries, continue after HLPF, and that it's not a one-time thing, that civil society is engaged in implementing Agenda 2030, but it's a more permanent, a given actor to be engaged in the processes. So I'm looking forward to discussing more on the panel afterwards, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Sandra. I think you've completed the picture very well in terms of Norway, and it's great to see such a strong engagement mechanism underway there. So now, looking back at the scorecard, we saw that there seemed to be more challenges in a number of the Latin American countries, a number of the countries there in Latin America scoring less highly. And we know that in Colombia, there have been a number of challenges over the recent times, including quite large-scale protests. So I'm really pleased that we have Lina joining us from the Confederation of NGOs of Colombia, SECON. I believe, Lina, you'll be speaking in Spanish. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Oli and Nicolas. I want to salute the governments of Norway and Malaysia, as well as the UN Development Coordination Office, and my fellow panelists, CSO representatives from Norway, Sondre, Malaysia, Denise, and Sierra Leone, Samuel. We share concerns and a lot of creativity to achieve the agenda in each specific context. That's for sure. Please adjust the translation service because I will speak in my own language, Spanish. Thank you very much for that. Nosotros estamos como sociedad civil organizada en la posición de valorar que el gobierno colombiano, en medio de la compleja circunstancia que mencionaba Oli, en la que nos ha puesto además la COVID-19 y la agudización de la crisis social, económica y de salud que ha traído la pandemia, haya hecho por tercera vez un reporte nacional voluntario. Nos parece que eso es, hay que remarcarlo y hay que agradecerlo en el sentido de que expresa un compromiso con la Agenda 2030, compromiso que compartimos. El reporte considera los aportes de la sociedad civil, algunos de ellos. Sin embargo, tenemos que decir que nuestra voz está muy limitada por razones diversas, y lo que se ve en el reporte es una muestra clara de cómo sucede el proceso no solo de elaboración del reporte, sino por supuesto de implementación de la agenda. El hecho de que la aparición de los datos, de las cifras, de los alcances, de los rezagos, de los avances, etcétera, que aporta la sociedad civil al logro de la agenda aparezcan en una sección mínima en el reporte, es una expresión clara de cómo es que estamos participando en él y de cuán limitada, como decía, está nuestra voz en la elaboración del reporte y en el diálogo con el gobierno y con la empresa privada. Quiero centrar la atención en unas cuantas comprensiones simples, pero muy poderosas, para no dejar a nadie atrás. La primera de ellas es que hacer el reporte no es implementar la agenda. Con mucho juicio y con mucha dedicación, el gobierno colombiano ha escrito el tercer reporte nacional voluntario, pero hacerlo no significa que en el terreno y en la realidad cotidiana estemos viendo logros como los que el reporte indica. De acuerdo con una cifra global que todavía no entendemos de dónde sale, el gobierno colombiano dice en el reporte que hay un 72% de alcance de logros de metas. Y realmente quisiéramos discutir esa cifra. Nos habría gustado mucho discutirla antes de la publicación del reporte. Sin embargo, lo que sabemos, quienes estamos en el terreno 24 horas, 7 días a la semana sin pausa, es que muchas de las metas están lejos de ser alcanzadas. Y por esa razón quisiéramos pues tener una posibilidad, y este es el segundo mensaje claro, y es que quisiéramos tener la posibilidad de que exista la plataforma multiactor. Esa es la clave para conocer avances y rezagos, para saber qué tenemos y qué nos falta en el diálogo multisectorial entre la sociedad civil, el gobierno y la empresa privada. Esa plataforma no funciona a pesar de estar descrita con gran detalle en el reporte. Por lo tanto, este segundo punto se relaciona con el primero. Escribir el reporte no necesariamente implica estar implementando la Agenda 2030. El ambiente habilitante para las organizaciones de la sociedad civil en América Latina y en el Caribe y Colombia no es la excepción. Está muy estropeado. Para que podamos hacer lo que hacemos, las organizaciones de la sociedad civil, tenemos demasiados obstáculos y quisiéramos que el reporte hiciera una serie de compromisos. Este es el tercer punto que quisiera enfatizar. El reporte no deja compromisos en relación con cómo de ahora en adelante vamos a hacer para seguir trabajando los actores del desarrollo en la consolidación de lo que ya tenemos y en el alcance de lo que todavía nos falta. El trecho para lograr las metas es grande. CEPAL, que es la Comisión Económica para América Latina y el Caribe, ya ha anunciado que la pandemia por COVID-19 implica un retroceso de más o menos 10 años en el desarrollo sostenible para América Latina y el Caribe. Y esto nos está sucediendo en parte debido a la pandemia por COVID-19, pero también en parte debido a que vamos tarde en el logro de los objetivos de la agenda. Esto nos preocupa la coincidencia entre el retroceso de 10 años anunciado por CEPAL justo en la década que es la década de la aceleración. Esas dos cuestiones que han colisionado debido a la COVID-19 prenden todas nuestras alertas como sociedad civil para pedirle al gobierno que haga una rendición de cuentas públicas en relación con los ODS. Eso lo necesitamos. Y esa rendición de cuentas públicas, que es el cuarto y último punto sobre el cual quisiera que centráramos la atención, es una fortaleza de las organizaciones de la sociedad civil en Colombia. Tenemos nuestro propio sistema de rendición social pública de cuentas y quisiéramos recibir en equidad la misma transparencia en el manejo de la información. El hecho de que el acceso a la información esté limitado pasa por cosas tales como que en la página web de ODS que administra el gobierno, el lenguaje sea ciudadano y que todas las personas podamos acceder a esa información sin ninguna restricción. Como decía, son 4 cuestiones muy simples, pero realmente poderosas. Es decir, cuando accedemos a la información, cuando el ambiente habilitante está habilitado, cuando podemos constatar que no es solo hacer el reporte, sino implementar la agenda, y cuando participamos en la implementación y en la elaboración de la agenda, pues ganamos todas las personas y eso precisamente es lo que necesitamos en este momento. Muchas gracias, Oli y Nicolás, por este diálogo en el que seguimos adelante.
Muchísimas gracias, Lina. Es muy fuerte sus puntos. Muchísimas gracias. We recognize that there are big challenges in many countries. And I think what you've highlighted there, Lina, is the gap so often between the proposals and the claimed opportunities for interaction and accountability, and then the reality of what actually happens in practice. And we know that that's a challenge in many countries. So thank you for that very clear and candid assessment from Colombia. So now we come back to Malaysia to give a civil society viewpoint. And we have Dr. Denison Jayasuriya. Wonderful to have you, sir. And I know you've been working on this area for many years. We look forward to your inputs. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ollie. I thank the Government of Norway and the Action for Sustainable Development for this opportunity to share on the VNR process in Malaysia from a civil society perspective. The Malaysian CSO SDG Alliance was established in October 2015 and is a network of 50 CSOs, NGOs involved in economic, social, environmental concerns, including human rights and good governance. We are working alongside poor and vulnerable communities, women, young people, indigenous people, disabled persons, undocumented migrants, and refugees in addressing all SDG concerns. We have been in touch with the Economic Planning Unit, the lead agency of SDG, throughout this period. We participated in the 2017 VNR drafting process, the National SDG Roadmap, and in the 2019 National SDG Summit. In late October 2019, the Malaysian Parliament approved the establishment of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on SDGs. This is a bipartisan group with the Alliance, the CSO Alliance, as the secretariat. The localizing of SDGs in 30 parliamentary constituencies is undertaken by the APPGM SDG, funded by the government. In the 2021 VNR preparation, CSOs are members of the VNR Technical and Steering Committee set up by the Economic Planning Unit. CSOs provided input and reviews of the draft VNR document. We were active in all the online conversations. We hosted 5 working groups where 62 leaders from CSOs and academic networks participated. The findings were submitted to the national VNR process and published online. In the preparation of the scorecard report, we formed a core team from the facilitators and rapporteurs of the 5 VNR working groups. We hosted 2 discussions to collectively review the scores. In addition, we hosted 3 specific focus groups on gender, disability, and indigenous persons. For the overall score, the CSOs gave Malaysia a cumulative score of 57%, which is fairly high in the comparison of how CSO ranked other countries around the world and also in Asia. The tables just now showed either 4, 5, 6 was the average, except for 1 SDG. On specific SDGs, our scorecard indicated that Malaysia has done well in SDG 1, poverty, SDG 3, health, SDG 4, education, SDG 6, water and sanitation, with the highest score for health at 66%. The assessment is consistent with the overall development agenda, with high investment both in the social and economic sectors. The COVID-19 pandemic has had an impact on the livelihood of many vulnerable communities, including the informal sector, undocumented, migrants, and refugee communities. we recognize that more needs to be done in SDG 5 gender, SDG 10 inequality, and the environmental and SDGs such as SDG 13 on climate change, SDG 14, life in water, SDG 15, life on land. CSOs have ranked SDG 16 as the lowest in their assessment at 42% and call on the government to devote more attention on SDG 16 in strengthening governance and institutions, human rights, and democratic freedoms. We also did a ranking on the 10 categories in the scorecard that was highlighted earlier. Here we noted that Malaysia had scored high on the top 3 categories: policy framework, highest at 72%, action plans and agencies or institutions of government delivery. However, Malaysia scored lower in categories 5, implementation, category 6, awareness and capacity building, and lowest at 45% for the category 8, which is transparency and accountability. In our report, we did an analysis also based on the 5 SDG Ps, namely people, prosperity, planet, peace, and partnership. Highest score were for people, SDGs 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and the lowest score was for peace and justice in terms of SDG 16. Finally, on the matter for a strong CSO voice, we as CSOs must provide evidence-based policy advocacy and feedback from the grassroots, especially the voice of the most vulnerable groups. Government too must facilitate an enabling environment, an open, inclusive, and transparent process for multi-stakeholder engagement at all levels. In addition, access to data is key. CSOs recognize the role played in Malaysia by the Department of Statistics, and this must be enhanced further. Ollie, thank you for this first intervention.
Thank you very much, Dennison. And time is pressing on, so I will look to move quickly on to our next speaker, who is from Sierra Leone, and this will complete the picture from different parts of the world. Samuel Toure from the SDG Coalition there in Sierra Leone. Samuel, you have the floor.
Thank you, Oli, and thanks to colleagues. And it's really, really good to hear what's happening around and how governments have been actually collaborating with other colleagues. I can say it's good to hear what's the Norwegian, the kind of idea and the collaboration with the government so far. So for our own case in Sierra Leone, one thing that we've been able to enjoy from 2016 to date is the fact that the government have been able to recognize the participation of civil society organization in every VNR engagement. So this is our third VNR engagement where we had, and we participated in the first one, 2016, and then in 2019 we also participated. But this one in 2021 we had to learn from previous engagements and improve on it. So what happened with the engagement is that we try to strengthen our work with the government to be able to put more emphasis on areas that we are not laid more emphasis, especially with the principle of leaving no one behind. We actually was keen around that in working with the government to ensure that developing this report, we needed to take those principles into consideration. So what happened during the process is that we had a very good interface meeting first with the government to know the steps or the kind of approach the government wanted to use. And then from between the civil society and the government. And then we were introduced to the process, and That led to a stakeholder meeting, not just with the civil society anymore. It just moved to getting the parliamentarian involved and getting the media as well involved. And then we are able to like develop a questionnaire that will be able to guide as to how we do process this year. So we are given put in charge, the CSO we are put in charge to do the data collection. So in that data collection, we're able to like as well introduce the scorecard that we've just had just now. And I can confirm that those scores really represent what we share from our part here, because we've made a good progress in certain area. However, there are still more work to be done in order for us to say we have achieved specific goals. So we had planned to do engagements at a regional level, because Sierra Leone is divided into 4 regions, about 7 million people. So it's not that of a big country, but huge challenges. So what happened is that we were able to expand our reach as civil society to be able to reach out to all the 16 districts across the country. And each district, we are able to engage about 60 people from different sectors. And this sector represents an inclusive approach that we use that looks at women and girls, persons with disability, the traders union, the drivers union, the local farmers, teachers. We had the government key actors, we had the media, we had LGBTQ, we had everybody that concerns that are also part of the whole thing, are also part of it. We had the local leaders within the communities, we call them the chief. They are there as well to look at the various survey form, and they give out some of their input into the whole process. So we were able to imagine you are reaching out to about 60 people across the 16 districts to be able to get their inputs into the system. The government prioritized education as one of the key areas for the focus, because we are responding like about 11 goals, and looking at goal 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. We're looking at 8, 10, 12, 13, 14, 16, 17. Those goals were priority goals for Sierra Leone. And among those goals, from the findings we've got, we realized that key progress have been made in the area of goal 5, where a lot of the environment, I can say, legislative laws have been passed on protecting women, gender, and then looking at how they also like supporting the empowerment of women through other organizations. But we see great progress in the area of goal 16, where we have organizations that have been stepping up to provide justice, especially to the poor people around it, because Sierra Leone has a traditional way of approach where it's in a society where there's comprised of a huge or small amount of people, justice is very much difficult to prevail, because when something happens, it's tradition in that particular place actually let the people suffer. So due to the existence of those organizations, they are able to like turn the tides around. So justice have been able to serve to people in remote areas, and the government as well have been able to capitalize on that score to be able to get it done. One of the key challenges that we realize is that many of these players that we call to come, it was for the first time they are hearing about the SDG. So we see that the SDG itself in Sierra Leone is not popular. Many people may have heard about the SDG, but they don't know what it means, and they don't see themselves how they connect into it. So localizing and creating ownership of the SDG was one key thing that we've been emphasizing in our recommendation to the government. So that's some of the key areas. And then we're looking at, from there, we developed a report, moved the report to the government, and then we followed it, go into validation process, where we got key stakeholders involved, ensuring our findings were incorporated into the report. Challenges occur. I'm not sure whether all of those challenges were put, because it was too hard to be able to government to include, because it will not like give the government they can face the one thing when they go to a global platform. You see, so the engagement was quite inclusive, and the participation of people leaving no one behind were able to achieve it from the CSO point. But we are still calling on government to create a kind of a platform where we do engagements, not just when it comes to VNR, but in the continuous process, in order for us to be able to localize and also create ownership. Beg your pardon, create ownership, and as well as be able to like look at some of the key challenges where we can be able to work with the SDG, not just when it comes to VNR process, which has been the challenge here. It is good that they involve CSO, but the support in order for us to like be able to work with the government has been a great challenge on our path here. I can just stop here for now. Thank you, Oli, and thanks for the team.
Thank you so much, Samuel. And I'm sorry we never have enough time for these dialogues that we would like. Of course, there's so much more that we could share. And I can see you've highlighted something very important, though, I think, Samuel, which is that we all start from very different baselines. And that sometimes makes it a challenge when we're looking at the evaluation of progress in different countries. If we're looking from a different baseline, and therefore the perception of progress may be different depending on the goals. And I've seen some questions also in the chat coming in about how do we compare the situation, say, for example, in Laos with Germany, where it's such a different cultural background and such a different political scenario. And it does make it a challenge to find those comparisons. So I think we're learning together. And that's exactly what the purpose of this conversation is to go deeper. And hopefully over the coming year, we can also further develop this model with all of you so that we can get even more accurate in terms of identifying what those trends are in different parts of the world. So we only have 10 minutes left, unfortunately, so we really are coming to the end. So I'd like to go back round to each of the panelists, and I'm afraid it will only be 2 minutes each. So I was thinking we would go back first to Lina from Sekong, and then we can come to Denison, Samuel, and then we close with Sondra for the closing words. So Lina, and if you might consider also, how can we go forward with this? What would be the next steps after the VNR to actually implement some of the changes that you've highlighted? So 2 minutes, please, over to you.
Thank you, Ali. I think that our government needs to make a very simple but very powerful comprehension about the meaning of listening, the CSOs. Listening is the key. So if they listened, maybe they can recognize what we are doing to achieve the great challenges that the agenda is facing us right now in the time we are living in. But of course, that recognition is in order to be an ally. So I think that the most powerful thing that other governments and the international community can make for us is to press the governments, not only the Colombian government, but the regional governments too, to listen and to recognize that without CSOs, there's no development, not sustainable development. So listen, recognize, and work together. It seems to be simple, but it makes the difference for real. Thank you.
Thank you, Lina. That was very clear and within the time, so I appreciate that. And I think you've given some very strong proposals also on how we might work together going forward. Denison, back to you.
Yeah, thank you, Ollie, and thank you to the panel. I think the discussion has been interesting. I think in the Malaysian context, we are having a good relationship in the VNR preparation process. It tends to be a hectic period, but the consultation this time with the review of the draft reports and the CSO inputs were better received. But I think CSOs want a continuous engagement, not just an ad hoc one, an engagement that is more institutionalized, and the economic planning unit is much more open in that process. But civil society wants that engagement across all the agencies at all the different levels. And so that's an area that would require what CSOs are saying is a level of trust between the different actors in a multi-stakeholder approach. Trust between government and civil society, academia, private sector, grassroots community, national government to local government, and so forth. So it's a massive cross-cutting nature of SDGs, and within that context, I think this is important. I'll just conclude with one more point, Oli. I know you're looking a bit stressed. The point is, we can learn actually from other examples like Norway. Yesterday, I was in a panel where Nepal highlighted its commitment to SDG 16 from a government point of view and SDG 16 plus. And this is an Asian country, not a very large country. And so I think the cross-learning, and that could be something that the international NGOs could facilitate, capacity building, and actually learning best practices that we can improve the engagement process, because we must be seen as fellow workers together for development, especially to the most vulnerable in society. So I think that might be strengthening the partnership process, and I would really like to know how Norway sets up this forum or an engagement that is much more institutionalized, with access to data, trust, and relationships. Thank you, Ollie.
Thank you, Dennis, and I think you've highlighted a very practical proposal there, which we would certainly look forward to exploring further around building some exchanges outside just these very highly intense period of the HLPF, outside these busy days, but also making sure that we enable those exchanges to happen between different national coalitions. And I also see in the chat, and I acknowledge the Mexican coalition, which has done a fantastic job in terms of engaging there in Mexico, and they clearly have experiences that we would have loved to also feature in this session. There are many others who have been active. We know in Indonesia, in, as you mentioned, Nepal, in India, in many countries where there have been strong experiences of building dialogues and building platforms for engagement. So let's certainly explore that. And we also are grateful to the support that we've had from the Swiss government and the Danish government to enable us to do some of that capacity building. And we look forward to continuing that with you all over the coming year. So we have two more speakers to come back to. Samuel first from Sierra Leone, back to you. Some key thoughts going forward.
Okay, thank you. I think looking at us in Sierra Leone for as a case study in the first year, we think civil society more or less like have been paralyzed in terms of looking at in terms of capacity or kind of having to. There are a lot of available opportunities here to engage actually, but looking at this, the capacity and the kind of support it requires to move those things forward are quite challenging, and the government has not been in well placed to see how they can support CSOs or embrace CSO outside just forming the VNR reports. I think going forward, what I look to working forward is to see how we can be able to establish a strong collaboration in the area of building and capacity to complement our efforts in the diverse region, just so that we position ourselves to handle some of the key issues which are more challenging going forward. So by the time we arrive coming back in a session like this, we should be able to have an environment quite enabling, not just for our CSO coalition on the SDGs, but I think for all the Armenian CSO organizations within the country. So we're looking forward to establishing a stronger collaboration or partnership with an organization that have done extremely well in the area. And I'm still looking forward to learning more. I'll join my colleague to learn more from the Norwegian, to looking at how they're able to build upon those systems that the government are able to listen to them. They can be able to like build upon those things, and those can be like a good practice that we're really looking forward to learning from, to see how we can improve ourselves here, so that we can meet to some of the challenges that the government poses when civil society wants to come up. Okay, I think it's never an easy task from the civil society to the government. It's always a challenge, you know, but we must see ourselves, just like what my colleague said, as partners in development and not as an enemy or against each other. So we want to see how we could build upon those things, building capacity, supporting one another to complement our global approach in achieving the sustainable development. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Samuel, and also within your time and very inspiring to remind us about the steps that we can take together in solidarity. So for the closing remarks, I'd like to hand back to Sondre from the Norwegian Forum. Sondre, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And thank you for Samuel and Dennison for wanting to learn from us later on. We are currently learning from Germany and Finland about this new forum. So it is, I can really say that it's very useful to share experiences and to talk with colleagues in other countries. I think going forward in Norway, we will now have to build a strong national forum and implement the national action plan, which will be a lot of work. And I hope that it will enable better and more honest discussions about our dilemmas and our problems. We have some problems with our challenges is very much linked to policy coherency and our negative footprint abroad, which I hope that these mechanisms will make it easier to discuss it across different stakeholders, and hopefully we can find some better solutions for it. Internationally and in our networks internationally, I hope that we could share more experiences. In Norway, we have had great experiences with learning from other countries, and we are happy to share our experiences this year with our VNR process. It is crucial to have some good examples to show to when you advocate something to your government or you want to make a proposal. And we should really both make information available for our partners abroad, and also participate in these networks to share what we know and what are the challenges, because it's often difficult to foresee the challenges that you will face. But if you talk to a colleague that have done the same thing as you will do, often they will give you some good advice. So that is also very practical and very hands-on advice, which we could follow more. So thank you, Ollie, so much for wonderful moderating and for co-hosting this event with us, and also the Norwegian government for co-hosting. Over to you, Ollie.
Well, thank you again from our side. Thank you so much to the Norwegian government, to the Norwegian Forum for Development and Environment, and to all of our national coalition partners and friends and allies who we work with throughout the year to build up towards this HLPF moment. As you've seen, this is an ongoing process, and many of the national coalitions that you've heard from today are very active, in spite of the HLPF in their own context, and will continue to be so. And we hope that we might help to stimulate that exchange of views going forward. So please do all tune in next week when the VNRs take place at the UN. And we know that some of you are active already in preparing civil society responses to the VNRs when they take place during the official sessions. We will make sure to share all of the information that's been available today, including the full scorecards. Some of those already going out on social media as well. So please do follow us on @Action4SD. And I also want to thank, before we close, I want to thank the interpreters who have made this possible. It's wonderful to have the French and Spanish inclusion, and we hope that in future we'll also be able to have additional languages. So thank you again to everyone, and we look forward to seeing you in future sessions. And those of us who have the screens on, perhaps we can just wave and say goodbye.